The billionaire CEO mocked her style, but at the gala she left him speechless. The boardroom at Stellar Dynamics was a masterpiece of modern design. Sleek glass walls, polished marble floors, and a panoramic view of the glittering San Francisco skyline. The room was filled with the sharpest minds in the tech industry, all dressed to perfection in tailored suits, elegant dresses, and shoes that gleamed under the soft lighting. All except one, Lila Harper. She sat at the far end of the long glass-topped table, her outfit a stark contrast to the sea of luxury around her. Her cream-colored cardigan was soft but slightly frayed at the edges, paired with a simple black pencil skirt and flats that had seen better days. While her colleagues carried designer bags and wore watches worth more than her monthly rent, Lila carried a worn leather satchel and a quiet confidence that no one seemed to notice. Except for Ethan Cross, the billionaire CEO of Stellar Dynamics. He noticed everything. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room. His sharp green eyes scanned the faces around him as he wrapped up the quarterly strategy meeting. His voice was smooth, confident, and carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed. "That concludes our agenda for today," Ethan announced, leaning back in his chair. The room exhaled, and employees began gathering their laptops and notes, eager to escape the intensity of the meeting. But just as the tension began to ease, Ethan's gaze landed on Lila. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Before we adjourn," he said, his tone casual but laced with a razor-sharp edge, "I have one observation." The room froze. Lila looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his, calm but questioning. Ethan tilted his head, his smirk widening as he studied her from head to toe. "At Stellar Dynamics, we pride ourselves on innovation, excellence, and, yes, image. And yet some employees seem to think that dressing for success is optional." A few people exchanged uneasy glances. Lila's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, the unspoken judgment hanging in the air. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she folded her hands neatly on the table and met his gaze head-on. "I wasn't aware that innovation required a designer label, Mr. Cross," she said, her voice steady. Ethan chuckled, a low, amused sound that sent a ripple of nervous laughter through the room. "Oh, it doesn't," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "But perception matters, Miss Harper. And if you're aiming for a seat at this table, you might want to consider looking the part." Lila's grip on her pen tightened. She wanted to fire back, to tell him that her worth wasn't measured by the price tag on her clothes. But instead she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stood. "Thank you for the feedback," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'll keep that in mind." With that, she gathered her things and walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. Ethan watched her go, his smirk still in place. But for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just underestimated her. Later that day, Lila stormed into the employee lounge, her frustration boiling over. She didn't care about fashion. She had worked her way up through sheer grit, late nights, and relentless determination. And yet Ethan Cross, a man who had never known a day of struggle in his life, thought her value could be reduced to the clothes she wore. "Hey, you okay?" a voice called out. Lila turned to see Jasmine, her closest friend at the company, and one of the few people who didn't buy into the corporate facade. Lila sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Ethan Cross is insufferable," she muttered. "He actually had the nerve to call me out in front of everyone for what I was wearing." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Sounds like someone needs a reality check. You're coming to the gala next weekend, right?" Lila hesitated. "I wasn't planning on it." Jasmine gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. "No way. You have to come. Think about it. This is your chance to shut him up once and for all. Show him that you don't need his approval to be incredible. Lila frowned, considering it. She didn't want to impress Ethan, but she did want to remind him and herself that she was just as capable, just as worthy, regardless of what she wore. All right, she said finally, a spark of determination in her eyes. Let's do it. The Stellar Dynamics annual gala was the event of the year held in the grand ballroom of the Golden Gate Palace Hotel. The room was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and a sea of the city's elite mingling under the soft glow of candlelight. Ethan arrived fashionably late, dressed in a custom-made black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and charming investors with his signature smile. But his mind kept drifting back to Lila Harper. He wasn't sure why, but her calm defiance in the boardroom had stuck with him. She probably didn't even show up, he muttered to himself, sipping his champagne. But just as the thought crossed his mind, the grand doors of the ballroom swung open, and the room fell silent. Ethan turned, and his breath caught in his throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Lila Harper. But this wasn't the Lila he had mocked in the boardroom. This Lila was radiant. She wore a sleek emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly, its delicate beading catching the light with every step she took. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple ponytail, cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, those same hazel eyes that had met his with such quiet defiance, now sparkled with confidence. Ethan stared, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. He had never seen her like this. She wasn't just beautiful, she was breathtaking. Lila stepped into the room, her head held high, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Cross was at a loss for words. Lila Harper stood in the grand ballroom of the Golden Gate Palace Hotel, her emerald green gown shimmering under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Her hair, styled in elegant waves, framed her face perfectly, and her simple yet striking makeup highlighted her natural beauty. She wasn't trying to look expensive, she just was. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cross was completely speechless. The same woman he had mocked just days ago now commanded the attention of the entire room. Lila walked with unshaken confidence, her quiet strength evident in every step. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. He had always prided himself on his control, his ability to read people and situations with ease. But Lila? She was an enigma, and it was driving him mad. Ever since the gala, Ethan felt completely off balance. He tried to dismiss it at first. It was just a surprise, he told himself. Seeing Lila transformed from a plain, unremarkable employee into a woman who commanded attention effortlessly. But that didn't explain why he couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself looking for her in the office, wondering what she would wear next, wondering if she would meet his gaze like she had that night. And worst of all, he hated seeing other men notice her. It happened on a Monday morning. Ethan had arrived at the office early, as always, but this time he spotted something that made his blood simmer. Lila was at the coffee station, laughing at something her coworker Ryan had said. Ryan, one of the younger executives, was smooth, charming, and far too interested in her. Ethan clenched his jaw. Since when did she smile like that at Ryan, and why did it bother him so much? He wasn't jealous, that would be ridiculous. Yet when he saw Ryan place a hand on the small of Lila's back, guiding her toward the conference room, Ethan felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. Ethan was distracted the entire morning. When Lila walked past his office later, her confidence as unwavering as ever, he did something uncharacteristic. He called out to her, "Miss Harper?" Lila stopped, turning toward him. Her expression was unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Cross?" For a moment, Ethan had no idea what to say. The usual sharp words, the teasing remarks, they were all on the tip of his tongue. But looking at her now, the woman who had proved him wrong in the most spectacular way possible, he found himself simply saying, "Never mind." Lila raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. She simply nodded and walked away, completely unaffected. And that irritated him even more. Ethan Cross was not a man used to being ignored. But Lila Harper, she was making a habit of it. Ever since the gala, she had been polite, professional, but distant, and it was driving him insane. So he did what he did best. He found a way to confront her. It happened after a department meeting. As employees exited the conference room, Ethan stepped into Lila's path, blocking her way. "Miss Harper." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes calm but guarded. "Yes, Mr. Cross?" He studied her for a moment, searching for any sign of the vulnerability he had seen in the boardroom. But there was none. "You've been avoiding me." Lila tilted her head slightly, amused. "I wasn't aware you required my attention outside of work responsibilities." His jaw tightened. Why was she so infuriatingly composed? "I just find it curious," he said smoothly, "that after the gala you suddenly have no interest in speaking to me." Lila gave him a small, unimpressed smile. "I wasn't aware we ever had deep conversations to begin with." Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had expected her to fluster, to stammer, but she was completely in control. It irritated him. And so he made a mistake. He scoffed, his voice turning cold. "So was it just for show, then? Dressing up to prove a point? Now that everyone's seen you, you don't need the act anymore?" The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Because for the first time, Lila's calm facade cracked. Her expression froze, and then something shifted in her eyes, not anger, but something much colder. Disappointment. Lila let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "I should have known," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "Known what?" She met his gaze, her voice steady but sharp. "That no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, you'll always see me as the same girl you mocked in that meeting." "That's not— I don't need your approval, Mr. Cross," she cut him off. "And I certainly don't need your opinion on who I am." Then without another word, she walked past him. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he had no idea how to fix what he had just broken. Ethan Cross was a man of habit. He liked order, control, and predictability. But ever since that conversation with Lila, the one where she had looked at him with pure disappointment before walking away, he had felt anything but in control. At first he told himself it didn't matter, that she didn't matter. But then he started noticing things, not just the way her confidence never wavered, or the way she held her head high despite everything. No, he started noticing her. How she was the first to arrive at work, and the last to leave. How she handled problems without hesitation, often solving crises before they even reached his desk. How employees, even the most junior ones, seemed to gravitate toward her. And then, one afternoon, he saw her in the break room, helping a new intern navigate a complicated project. Her patience, her kindness, it was unlike anything he had ever seen in the cutthroat world of stellar dynamics. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong about her all along. Ethan Cross had always been a man of control, but ever since the gala, ever since Lila Harper had walked into that ballroom and turned his world upside down, he felt like he was losing his grip. He tried to push it aside, to focus on work, but she was everywhere, in his thoughts, in his office, and the way she challenged him without even trying. And then, one afternoon, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. He had been walking past the break room when he spotted a new intern, nervous and fumbling with a stack of documents. Before the papers could scatter onto the floor, Lila was there. She crouched down, helping the young woman gather them, offering soft words of encouragement. Ethan watched as Lila guided the intern through the task, her voice calm, her patience unwavering. She wasn't doing it for recognition. She wasn't seeking approval. She simply cared. Something twisted in his chest. Had he been so blinded by her appearance that he had failed to see who she truly was? For the first time, Ethan wondered, had he been wrong about Lila all along? It started as a routine business dinner. A group of elite executives had gathered at the Sapphire Room, a 5-star restaurant in downtown San Francisco, for negotiations. Ethan had only half listened, his attention drifting somewhere else, or rather, someone else. Lila. She had been invited to the dinner as well. Her recent contributions to the company had earned her a seat at the table. Ethan had expected her to stay quiet, to simply observe, but instead she had held her own. She debated. She presented. She spoke with intelligence, with wit, with a quiet confidence that captivated the entire room. And apparently, she had captivated someone else too. Across the table, one of their business partners, a well-dressed, charming man named Victor Blackwell, was watching Lila with undeniable interest. Ethan noticed immediately the way Victor leaned closer, the way his eyes never left her. And then the final straw. Victor raised his glass toward Lila and said, "Miss Harper, I must say you're quite impressive. How about dinner? Just the two of us?" The entire table fell silent. Lila hesitated for half a second, not out of flattery, but because she was caught off guard. And before she could even answer, Ethan spoke. "She's busy." His voice was sharp, firm, laced with something unmistakably possessive. Lila's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" Ethan stood abruptly, reaching for her wrist and pulling her to her feet. "We need to talk," he muttered, guiding her toward the terrace. The confrontation on the terrace. Once outside, Lila yanked her arm free. "What the hell was that?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "You think you can just go to dinner with anyone?" Lila crossed her arms, an amused smirk playing on her lips. Are you seriously telling me who I can and can't have dinner with?" His jaw tightened. "I'm saying Blackwell isn't interested in business, and you know it." She raised an eyebrow. "Why do you care?" Silence. Ethan looked away for half a second, just long enough for her to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't want you to be taken advantage of," he said finally. Lila studied him, her gaze searching. There was something unspoken in his words, something deeper, and it hit her. "Oh, my God," she whispered, realization dawning. "You're jealous." Ethan stiffened. "I am not." Lila laughed, a soft, knowing laugh. For the first time, Ethan Cross looked flustered. She took a step closer, tilting her head slightly. "You totally are." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Go back inside, Harper." But as Lila turned to leave, she couldn't wipe the smirk off her face. And Ethan? He let out a quiet curse under his breath. Because he knew she was right. He was jealous, and he had no idea what to do about it. After that night, things shifted. Ethan was still Ethan, still arrogant, still impossible at times. But something was different. He no longer threw careless insults her way. Instead, he started noticing when she was overwhelmed with work, and he helped. Not in obvious ways, but in small ones. Like the time she had been drowning in paperwork, and somehow half of it mysteriously disappeared, processed and approved ahead of schedule. Or the time her laptop crashed, and before she could even submit a tech request, a new one arrived on her desk. At first, Lila didn't want to believe it had anything to do with him. But then one evening, she caught him. She had forgotten her phone in the conference room and went back to retrieve it, only to find Ethan standing by her desk, casually placing a wrapped sandwich beside her computer. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a brief moment, she saw it. Not the ruthless CEO, not the arrogant businessman. Just a man who, despite his best efforts, was starting to care. Something warm and unfamiliar settled in her chest. Maybe Ethan Cross wasn't entirely terrible. Ethan Cross had never been afraid of anything. Deals worth billions, negotiations with ruthless businessmen, controlling an entire empire. Easy, but this was terrifying. He had spent the last few weeks watching Lila Harper slip past every wall he had carefully built around himself, and worse, he let her. He noticed her in ways he never should. How she bit her lip when she was deep in thought, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was frustrated, how the sight of her, the sound of her laughter, the way she challenged him, the way she was simply Lila, felt like the only thing in his life that wasn't calculated. And that scared the hell out of him, because he knew how this story ended. Love wasn't a luxury someone like him could afford. He had seen what it did. His parents' marriage was proof enough. His father had put the company first. His mother had begged for more time, more attention, more of him. And in the end, she left. Ethan had promised himself he would never let that happen to him. The room erupted in applause, but neither Ethan nor Lila noticed. In that moment, the world around them faded away. All that mattered was the way her hands gripped his shoulders, the way his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer as if he never wanted to let go. The kiss was electric, a collision of all the unspoken words, the missed chances, and the raw emotion they had both been too afraid to admit. When they finally pulled apart, Lila's cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining with tears. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "For everything." Lila smiled, her fingers brushing against his jaw. "You're an idiot, Ethan Cross." He chuckled, a sound so warm and genuine that it made her heart skip a beat. "You're idiot," he corrected, his tone soft but firm. The crowd was still cheering, but Ethan didn't care. He took her hand, leading her off the stage and through the sea of people. They didn't stop until they were outside, the cool night air wrapping around them like a blanket. Lila leaned against the railing of the terrace, looking out at the city lights. Ethan stood beside her, his hand still holding hers, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "You really came all the way here just to say that?" Lila asked, her voice teasing, but her eyes soft. Ethan shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I told you. I don't care about anything except you." She turned to face him, her expression serious now. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to change who I am for you. I'm not going to become someone who fits into your world. If you want me, you have to want me." Ethan's gaze never wavered. "I don't want you to change, Lila. I fell in love with you. The woman who wears cardigans with frayed edges and still outshines everyone in the room. The woman who helps interns without expecting anything in return. The woman who isn't afraid to call me out when I'm being an arrogant jerk." Lila laughed, the sound light and free. "You are an arrogant jerk." "Yeah," he admitted, his smile widening. "But I'm trying to be better. For you." She studied him for a moment, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite name. "You know, you're not as bad as I thought you were." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" "Don't let it go to your head," she warned. But the smile on her face betrayed her words. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan and Lila navigated their new relationship with a mix of excitement and caution. There were moments of tension, of course. Old habits die hard, and Ethan's arrogance still reared its head from time to time. But every time he caught himself, he would stop, take a breath, and remind himself of what truly mattered. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know, I never thought I'd end up here," she admitted, her voice quiet. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "Neither did I, but I'm glad I did." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "Are you sure this is what you want? Because if you're not—" He cut her off with a kiss, soft and lingering. When he pulled away, his gaze was steady. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Lila smiled, her heart full. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Months later, Lila stood in the boardroom of Stellar Dynamics, now as the company's new chief operations officer. The room was filled with familiar faces, but her eyes immediately found Ethan's. He stood at the head of the table, his expression proud but tender. "Congratulations, Miss Harper," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that only she could hear. Lila smiled, her confidence unwavering. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." As the meeting began, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was everything he had never known he needed. Strong, kind, and unapologetically herself. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cross felt truly complete. Lila Harper stood at the entrance of the garden, her breath catching in her throat. The scene before her was nothing short of magical. Soft, golden lights twinkling like stars, fresh white roses lining the pathway, and a small, intimate table set for two under a canopy of fairy lights. At the center of it all stood Ethan Cross, his hands clasped nervously behind his back, his piercing green eyes fixed on her. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "What is this?" He stepped forward, taking her hand in his. "Just a small dinner," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes betraying his nerves. Lila raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Ethan Cross doesn't do small anything." He chuckled, but there was a vulnerability in his gaze that made her heart skip a beat. "For you, I'd do anything." As they sat down to eat, the air between them was filled with laughter and quiet conversation. But Ethan could barely focus on the food or the words. His mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. Tonight was the night he had been planning for months. The night he would ask Lila to be his forever. As the night deepened and the stars began to shine brighter, Ethan finally stood, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket. Lila's breath hitched, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. Ethan dropped to one knee, opening a small velvet box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. The design was simple yet elegant, just like her. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cross looked at someone not as a business investment or a deal to be won, but as his future. "Lila Harper," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I used to think love was a distraction. I thought it would make me weak. But then you walked into my life, and suddenly, nothing else made sense." Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she listened, her heart swelling with love. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "You changed me. You made me better, and now I can't imagine a single day without you." A soft gasp escaped Lila's lips as Ethan continued, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "So, Lila, will you marry me?" For a moment there was only silence. Then, with tears streaming down her face, Lila let out a choked laugh. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then louder. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into the deepest, most heartfelt kiss of his life. In that moment, he knew he had finally found his forever. 1 year later, their wedding was a dream come true. Not because of the grand venue or the extravagant details, but because it was real. The ceremony was held in the same garden where Ethan had proposed, now transformed into a breathtaking paradise of flowers and lights. When Lila walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on his, Ethan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. She was radiant, her smile lighting up the entire garden. And as they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives, Ethan knew he had never been more certain of anything. Beyond the wedding, what mattered most was what they built together. With Lila's passion and Ethan's resources, they launched the Harper Cross Initiative, a program dedicated to helping young women build their careers in business. The initiative provided mentorship, scholarships, and opportunities to women who, like Lila, had once struggled to find their place in a competitive world. Their days were filled with purpose, their nights with laughter, quiet conversations, and love. And every morning, when Ethan woke up next to the woman who had changed his life, he knew he had finally found something money could never buy: happiness, love, and a future worth everything. Ethan Cross had once thought that success was everything, that power, wealth, and control were all that mattered. But then came Lila Harper, the woman who proved him wrong. She wasn't just another employee or a passing distraction. She was his greatest challenge, his greatest lesson, his greatest love. In the end, it wasn't power or money that changed his life. It was her. Now they stood together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in life, in love, and in purpose. Because love isn't just about finding someone. It's about choosing them every single day. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Timeless Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming, emotional tale. Because sometimes the most unexpected stories lead to the most unforgettable love. Love has the power to change everything if we're brave enough to let it.